In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Lily Wilson, a veterinary surgeon who has created a new way of helping horse owners take the very best care of their equine partners. Today, we're going to be talking about needle shyness and what we can do to make injections a better experience for the horse and the handler. So here we go, episode 158, Needle Shyness with Dr. Lily Wilson. Hi, I'm Karen Rolfe, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So let's get started. Dr. Lily Wilson has a wide breadth and depth of passions and expertise. She's worked in practice treating pets, horses, and livestock in a variety of settings, including general practice in a hospital as an emergency clinician and volunteering overseas. She's done postgraduate programs in ecosystem health and in advanced veterinary practice. Her special interests are species-appropriate husbandry, anatomy and locomotion, pain physiology, ethical training, and mutually beneficial coexistence of people with the natural world. Lily is now combining her passions into a service that guides animal guardians to nurture all-round well-being and partnership. I think you're going to love this conversation on needle shyness. There's a lot of information here in this episode, and make sure you check the show notes for the link to her website and online resources for helping your horse get better about injections. She offers everything from free webinars to more supported online courses. All right, let's get right to our conversation. All right, welcome, Lily. Welcome back to the pod.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And so for those of you who don't know, Lily was on the podcast. I think yours was episode 118. So people can go back and check that out also, because I know I'm sure many people after this episode will be like, I want more. So we can get more Dr. Lily if you want. And I want to thank you for jumping on today, because I know you just flew in last night or yesterday from what sounds like a pretty cool trip, and we started to talk about it, and I'm like, ooh, let's save this because it just sounded so interesting. So yeah, can you share what you were just doing before you came home?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in Colorado for just under 3 weeks, and actually 11 days of that was in a very remote camping area in the Grand Mesa National Forest, up at 10,000 feet. And so all sorts of interesting ecology at that level. And what I was doing was a field course called Human and Natural Ecologies of Colorado. Actually, it was 2 field courses back to back with 2 different teachers, both of whom were excellent. And it was looking at the landscape and at the plants that were growing in various different conditions, and learning that basically one of the things that they say is we kind of want to get away from apologizing for our existence because of the damage that we have caused to the planet in some ways, because it is totally possible for us to be beneficial to the planet and just kind of relearn. I was talking to one of the assistants, and I mentioned the word disconnect, and he said, oh, no, you can't be disconnected. We all are connected. You might feel a disconnect, but you can't help but be connected. Oh, wow. And we were sort of came upon the word forgotten, I suppose, forgotten our connection rather than actually become disconnected. And it was incredibly rejuvenating and healing to do that, just be in nature, slow down hugely, kind of pay attention to the rhythms of the day, and find where to get water by seeing where there's water-loving trees, follow those willows down the hill, and find where the beavers have made a dam, and there might be some medicinal plants down there. There was some amazing subjects touched upon about things like the intelligence of the land and of plants, how plants tend to grow in places where we might come across them when we really need them, food or medicine. And partly that's the plants, but partly it's also because people have, for thousands of years, tended the wild and planted things, and on a scale of deep time. So a lot of these indigenous food plants or food plants that were used by indigenous people and still are, they are incredibly slow maturing. They wouldn't be suitable in a kind of commercial agriculture setting, because some of them take 10 or 20 years to develop the food part of the plant. So you might have a starchy tuber or something growing under the ground. And what would happen when people harvested them would be that they would plant some seeds back in the hole that they'd left from digging the root as an act of reciprocity, and also to ensure that usually their grandchildren would be able to come and dig roots in that area again. You know, it's not they weren't going to come back next year and be ready. They would be tended for years to come. So that was amazing to ponder that, how we move through the world so fast, and we miss stuff as a result of that. Yeah.
You just said so many huge things in that little story. I'm like, wait. I mean, just the delayed gratification, right? You're planting a seed for people who aren't even in existence yet. Perhaps, thinking about that future, which is amazing. And we're in a very immediate gratification sort of time right now. And the fact that you weren't using Google, you were looking at the trees and the plants.
Yes.
But the first thing you said, I mean, that's like such a deep spiritual lesson of we can't not be connected. We've forgotten. And it's just, to me, that just strikes me as like everything that I've learned in personal development always sort of comes back to that. Like, it's here, it's right now. We're the ones, covering it up or putting up a veil or blocking ourselves. That it's, we are connected. We are connected. Yeah. That's amazing.
We can't help but be. Yeah. And also I think maybe the word wording is important, because using a word like disconnected might even have a degree of shame attached to it. Whereas, using something like you've forgotten, and then also taking into account our current culture, modern society, unfortunately, is, even if you try, it's a little bit going against the tide to maintain that remembering of the connection sometimes. Yeah. No, it's so funny. It's just stuff I think about all the time, and like, why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing? And the message that keeps coming back to me is we're all here to remind each other that we are divine. We're here to remind each other. And so, yeah, just the way you phrase that is like, oh my goodness. Yes. Okay, well, that's the show, folks. Everyone's connected. Yeah, you don't need to try.
Solve the mysteries of the universe. Yeah, it's funny. My husband Dana's sister is really into organic farming and plants and natural medicines, and she's probably listening to this going, that's not what I do. Anyway, she's into all that stuff, but she's always showing us the plants that are around the property, and often how you said that they grow where they're needed, but like if there's like, for example, we have nettles, but she says, if you get into nettles, and it stings, she said, look around, because there's this other plant nearby that there's often the antidote. And she said, you'll find this other plant and you can rub that on and it'll take the sting away. It's like,
yes,
just
I love
amazing.
That.
Yeah. Anyway, well, that's any other tidbits.
Well, I think you might like this bit, that there's an observation that certain plants with medicinal qualities in the body, so I guess sort of the land of our souls, generally tend to have reflections in that where they grow in the land of the earth. So you could have something, for example, that tends to be cleansing of your lymphatic system if you take it, if you use it on your own land. And it has that effect in when it grows in the earth as well, which is amazing.
Oh,
it seems
the lymphatic
to
system
crop
of the
up
earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this whole world underneath the surface of the soil, which I think I'm going to have to investigate, because it's the little bits that I've come across is trees, roots, what's happening in there. Anyway, very cool. Yeah. So, all right, this is supposed to be an episode about needle shyness. I'm going to just make a big jump there.
Yeah, shift gears a
bit. But in the spirit of everything's connected, it's just, I think everything is connected. And so it's interesting. That's one of the things I love about what you do is, you're a veterinarian and I think all of these things inform every other one of the things. So just coming from the spirit of we're connected and, the healing part of the land, and, that's got to influence how you approach giving an injection to a horse.
Yes, it absolutely does.
Yeah. So, so I wanted to do the specific topic because it is so needed. I mean, just in the general management of horses, it comes up. And I'm just sort of curious, for you, like, did you want to focus on creating this course? And I haven't seen any other courses on this subject. Did you just see a sort of general gap in the information out there for people, or were there some specific experiences with horses of yours or your clients that made you decide, hey, I really need to to figure something out here?
Yeah, so it is a bit of both of those two things. Definitely some specific experiences. So I can go into a couple of stories, and then kind of explain where I saw the gap, I suppose, because there is some information about needle shyness, but I guess it's the level of depth and complexity and where different horse-human vet combinations might be coming from, might lead to some tailoring of approaches needed. I mean, it's incredibly common to come across it in my day-to-day work in clinics, and not just in horses, but in lots of species. But in horses, it's particularly challenging because in smaller animals, we tend to successfully restrain them. That could be a whole discussion in itself over whether or not that has any longer term effects. So we'll go into that on the horse side of things. But with horses, one of the things is it does become incredibly dangerous if they get into a state where there is a lot of fear involved. Then we can end up, well, there's all sorts of possible scenarios, one of which is being unable to give an injection. Two is getting hurt, whether that's the person holding the horse or the vet or the horse themselves. Three is being unable to treat something effectively, or administer pain relief or something like that. Another one is the restraint needed potentially causing trauma that's held in the body and comes up in other ways and gets worse and worse the more you attempt to give injections. Mm-hmm. And so a couple of things that really deeply influenced me. I've done some volunteer work overseas in some charity clinics, and I've seen quite a few of the diseases that we tend to vaccinate against. So in the cases in those countries, it's usually that the vaccines are not easily accessible to people to use, rather than that needle shyness is necessarily the sole reason for them not being vaccinated. But it is a possibility that if you had a horse that was so phobic, that they couldn't be injected, and vaccinations were out of the question, that you're at greater risk of some of those conditions. And that is, again, rather a nuanced situation, because one of the approaches with needle-shy horses might be really deciding which injections are actually necessary for your individual case, so your geographic location, level of risk, maybe injection site that it needs to be given into, their current other healthcare and all of that kind of thing. But there was one of the horses that we treated for tetanus. This was in Egypt. It was just a heartbreaking thing, because it's an incredibly painful, slow, well, it's a quite fast deterioration, but a very slow death. It's bad. And I'll never forget this particular horse in Egypt who, I could see that he understood, we were trying to help him, but he was basically, what tetanus causes is an involuntary muscle rigidity everywhere, and you end up with the horse unable to even move their jaw, eat or drink. It eventually affects the muscles of breathing. But it's very painful, because if you have your muscles clamped like that for all of that time, then you get a buildup of toxins and really sore muscles. It was obviously very hot in Egypt, and we tried really hard. The owner wanted to give the horse every chance, but yeah, we unfortunately weren't successful, and put him to sleep in the end. When he got to a stage where it's clear he wasn't going to turn a corner. And I just thought, even if a horse were to recover from that, that's such a big thing to go through, your whole body going through such an ordeal like that. And much as there should be a discussion around the choice of vaccines, which ones to give when, to which individuals, it would just be, it strikes me that if it just wasn't an option because of needle shyness, what a terrible, reason for getting a condition like that.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one thing that got me thinking. Another one was a horse that was so needle phobic. This was actually as a result of an operation that he had, where he needed to be sedated and then have local anaesthetic placed. And it was following that he developed the phobia. There's various reasons why that could have occurred, but it resulted in such an intense phobia that he knew when it was the vet just arriving on the yard, and almost couldn't remain tied up.
Wow.
He was so terrified, kind of climbing the wall. And one day, so we kind of took a step back from any kind of injections. He no longer had any vaccines. He occasionally got some mild colic episodes, and we tried using oral pain relief. But one day he colicked quite badly, and he was still so needle phobic that despite his excruciating pain, he still was going to fight to the death to not have an injection. And so basically we had to wait until he was incredibly sick to treat him effectively with any pain relief. And luckily we did manage to turn it around. But that was also another situation where I thought, there's got to be a way to reverse this, at least partially, to the point where we have options for treatment. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have to give an injection. It's not always possible to use alternative routes of medication. When they're in a very debilitated condition, injections often need to go intravenously. And in cases where their guts are not working, you can't get oral pain relief in. So yeah, that was another where I thought, wow, I need to look into this and figure out how to approach, helping them to feel safe and understand the procedure.
Yeah, wow. I can see how those two stories could leave a huge impact. Yeah. So So with those, I mean, I think the answer to most things is in preparation, in advance, way before things are necessary. But just out of curiosity, in a case where, let's say, the horse that has some phobia about needles and it's an emergency and you need to get something done, are there any ways in the moment that can help mitigate that, or is the answer really the preparation, which is the ultimate answer, which we'll, I'm sure, go into?
Yeah, so there are things you can do in the moment when it's urgent or an emergency, and there may be methods of restraint that are required, which you would prefer not to do if you were fully taking them through the process of preparing them with full understanding on their part. And we can go into this more, but with some agency in the process, some choice and a voice in the process, basically, builds a huge amount of, or reduces fear, builds a huge amount of trust. There are some medications that you can give by mouth, which might be helpful. You would always have to speak to your vet on an individual case-by-case basis, and by country there might be different formulations available and things like that. But that's one of the things that I discuss in the course as some options where you might need a bit of oral medication beforehand. Having said that, certain types of oral sedation could actually set you back if the horse feels that they are immobilized and they're still very much aware. Gotcha. Because that adds to a trauma experience where you're unable to do anything about it. So it's quite a nuanced subject, hence why I do go into it in some depth. But there are other things, like, say, for example, so physical restraint is another thing that's a big subject, because you can have types of physical restraint that are traumatizing, and then you can have types which are helpful for getting it done in a much quicker way and avoiding building that fear response up and up and up and up and up and up into a frenzy. So, for example, things like things that we would maybe prefer not to use, but which keep everyone safe, like having them in chutes or stocks or something like that. Because if you do have them in a more loose situation, you might have to rely on physical restraint of the head. That would be your only option, really. And you're unlikely, if they're in a huge fear state, it's also unlikely to be very effective, and you end up with explosions that are dangerous for people. And the other thing that you could do in an emergency situation is change your route of injection. So you could needle-shy horses are very challenging to inject intravenously, because you need them to be still enough for the precision of finding the vein and then getting the medication in. So you could start with intramuscular, for example, although that's also quite nuanced, because sometimes it can be incredibly painful into certain muscles, and depending on what's going on in the horse's body, and depending on the drug used, some have irritant qualities if they're not injected intravenously. So all of those things play in, but there are definitely things you can do. And because there's a spectrum of needle shyness, so you could go anything from they just kind of need to move their feet and they're not really okay, but you can get it done, all the way to dangerous explosive behavior and unable to get anywhere near them, or completely shut down, standing still like a rock, but really not okay about it, and possibly affected for days afterwards in what they are happy to participate in with people, not wanting to be caught afterwards or things like that. So that I would also call that needle shyness, I suppose. Can't remember where I was going with that. Yeah, what to do.
Jet lag.
Yes. What to do in an urgent situation with those ones. If it's a kind of milder manifestation, I suppose you might be able to use things like distraction techniques in the moment, with lots of food, a buddy standing right next to them, all sorts of things like the type of environment you're in. So not taking them to a completely different area of where they would usually be just because it's more convenient for the vet, making sure that they're in their familiar environment. Sometimes it can be as simple as that you don't heighten, you don't go up that ladder too far before you get started. And also encouraging them to have a soft, low head carriage, especially for intramuscular injections into the neck, because a rock hard muscle will be more painful, and it will tend to be harder to insert the needle in a smooth way. And then once you've had one attempt, if they're fearful or there's underlying pain and it is actually very painful, to be honest, you might have lost your chance of doing it in that easier way for the day.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for some horses that have been through my barn that they're not fully needle phobic, but they really would prefer not, that in times where it has to be done, to just like you said, having a buddy there, having a distraction, having some food, having their head down. And then two other things that I've used is, there was one horse in particular, like we just put an ice pack on, and as if we put an ice pack on for 20 minutes before, it was enough that then by the time we went to the needle, it just took away that he was fine with that. So it was like, wow, we just needed the ice pack.
Yes.
And then the other thing that we've done is just sort of scratching them all, really scratching, because isn't it true that like pains, signals to your brain about pressure will get there before pain, just a split second. So you can kind of flood with information about pressure and scratching, and then the pain isn't. So for horses that are maybe not traumatized, but they just don't like the feel of it, I've found those sorts of things, head down, cookies, scratchy, 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 scratchy all over, or the ice pack, have been really good for those sort of on the edge, to make it slightly less unpleasant, and maybe even kind of pleasant if they really like the cookies, or their neck is relaxed. And that can start to, it'll at least keep it from getting worse, or maybe it gets a little better. The ice pack horse was like, that was all he needed. He just broke that cycle of that initial jab, and that was all we had to do.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that an ice pack is a good idea, and absolutely a different kind of tactile sensation in a similar area to where you're going to inject, and alongside the injection as well. Sometimes vets will or vet techs will employ a neck twitch at the same time as an intramuscular injection. I actually prefer something like scratching, because I think sometimes the neck twitch can slightly increase that their level of uncertainty.
That's what I've seen. They kind of
yeah. So the scratching, definitely, it feels friendlier and like, can I help you with this kind of vibe, than the neck twitch feels more like, now stand still.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, so those are some of the in the moment things, but ideally we're thinking about this ahead of time and preparing horses. And this is, I love this subject because I actually am a needle shy human. Like, it's a thing. I can give an injection, but I will avoid doing it. I'll work pretty hard to avoid doing it. Like for my horses, I'll get anybody else to come do it.
Yeah.
And I can if I need to. But for myself, like I have a really strong vasovagal reflex, and I'll hit the ground, and have hit the ground. So I even had some hypnosis on it. Now I'm like, I'm doing much better, but it's still a thing. And it's interesting because, horses are not humans. We have different brains. But in this circumstance, I don't think it's my human thinking brain that's working in this case. It is a primitive part of my brain. So I was thinking, I have my strategies for when I have to go, get blood drawn or something. And I know what makes it worse and what makes it better. And I have a feeling it's very similar to with horses. So for me, it's worse if the person is not friendly, It's worse if I don't feel like they're listening to me. That's actually a big one. Like if I mention, hey, sometimes I faint, and there's like no recognition of that fact at all, and they just go about their business. Or if I say, ow, that hurts, and they make no modification into what they're doing. So if I feel out of control or they're rushing me, like that if those things are happening, I have to turn that around somehow. So it's better if I go in ahead of time with the mindset of, I'm doing this to help myself, this is making me healthier, this is my idea, right? It's better if I make up personal connection. So I come in with jokes. Man, I am just the most jokey, jovial person at 6 a.m. at, the Quest blood draw place. So I'm trying to bring levity, and I tell them, hey, there's a good chance I'll faint. And then, that often gets their attention, or I'll crack a joke, I'll ask them something, and then I'm good. Or if I say, oh, hang on a second, and then it can be like easy peasy for me, or, I'll feel like hitting the ground. So I would imagine, is that similar to what we need to do for horses? I'm picking up tips for myself here on this episode. I'll be listening.
So two really big things that you just brought up. One is it's like our body's neuroception of safety, which is not really a conscious cognitive thing. And that sense of whether somebody is attuned or totally misattuned, that is a big red flag for our body, just viscerally. Oh, I might not be safe here. So that's one thing that it definitely plays into it with horses. It may have been more than two things. The second thing,
I'm an expert in this, in human needle shyness.
Absolutely.
For
me. So the second thing, and I kind of have two things to say about it, so it's kind of two things, is that if you ask them to wait, and that's a huge, if they're not willing to meet you there, that's another thing that will make you feel very unsafe. And that might seem like a difficult thing to achieve with horses. And one of the things in the preparation for needle shyness is actually teaching them how to cue us to wait in the process. And that they can do that. It might be really quite revolutionary for some horses that they are able to cue a person to wait in a, and it could be for anything, transferable to other activities like mounting or bridling or picking up a foot. And the other thing that kind of comes from that is going back to my recent camping trip, slowing down. It's hugely important. And our expectations for ourselves and our horses, and all of the, silent expectations or assumptions of judgments that other people might have of us, depending on how we act next. So things like having a conversation with the vet who's coming as to, maybe if you're partway through this process, I've been doing some preparation, but I really want to honor how the horse feels. This is obviously in a case where it isn't an emergency, and it's absolutely necessary to give an injection. All of those things come into account first. But if you've decided you're booking a vaccination or a sedation for a dental exam or something like that, and just to feel fine about have this in the open as a plan. If this really is not going to go today or in 5 minutes, can we reschedule or can we give it longer? And it's something that we often don't give ourselves permission to do. And even just giving ourselves permission for that, you'll often find that it helps. Although I've just realized that might not be a very helpful thing to say, because then you might have that expectation. You're like, I don't have an expectation, and then I have this expectation because I don't have an expectation.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
It
they creep up on you.
Yeah. I had an experience with a vet that was coming here, and I knew there was going to need to be an injection, and I had been practicing with my horse. And the trouble, my practicing was difficult because she was fine with me, and even, to poke her with a little pointy thing. So the vet came, and already I felt, the horse getting defensive, but I was doing the same thing, like lower your head, and I just say, hold, good, treating. And she came in to do the injection, and the horse braced. And I said, oh, just hang on a second. And I asked the horse to lower the head. Good. And she was like, oh, yeah, you're doing that thing. And the vet was so excited. And she worked with me as she approached. And I'd say, wait, and she knew the timing. She knew how to do it. But the vet did not offer that until she saw me as the owner doing it. And I thought, that's really interesting. And she said, yeah, most people don't know that. And so just from the vet point of view, if, don't feel bad bringing that up to your vet, because you might be surprised. Like, they might be really into it and finally have an owner that can do this with them, because they probably don't see themselves as their role is to be a teacher or something like that. So I love that idea of putting that out in the open, like, hey, when you come, just so you know, this one horse, I'm working with her, and, do you have can you take a couple extra minutes, and, or whatever it is. And I think if it was really a disaster and it wasn't a necessary injection, that I would have been like, listen, like, let's not.
Yeah.
We'll do this next time, pay another barn call. It might be worth it.
Yeah. And I think that's, it feels great if an owner is into doing that, because I mean, most vets don't want to go from call to call with animals terrified of them and having a terrible experience. It doesn't feel very good by the end of the day. It's much nicer if we can bring that cooperation into the care that we give. And having that conversation, sometimes it might be uncomfortable, because there may be situations where that particular vet, or you might get a response, say if you're booking it in with the office or something, where you feel like that request really, they're not ready to accommodate that right now. And that's also useful information. And you do have the choice to rearrange or choose somebody else. That is something that you can do for yourself and your horse. Not just your horse, but it can lead to a huge amount of stress on the person's part as well.
We had a substitute vet come in once, and the same thing, like, to give some injections. And I had the same visceral response as I did when I go in to get my blood drawn. And this person, the horses were in the paddock. He went into the paddock. I'm putting the halter on, and he was like sneaking them. He was just sneaking the shots and getting them done so fast that the horses were just like, whoa, what just happened? But it was worse the next time. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, you don't know me, you don't know my horses, and you're just going around jabbing them. And it made it worse the next time a vet came to give an injection, because now they're like, don't trust that vet. He's sneaking around. Oh, that made me so, I'm like, just, hadn't even, never met me before. And he's out there jabbing the horse.
Yeah.
Like,
so
you're never coming back here. Never. Yeah. Oh my goodness. All right. So what would be the more ideal way to start to prepare, if you're like, okay, I have a new horse, or I want to prepare this horse as best as possible? And I know, you have a whole course on this, so this is going to be a nutshell. But what's the overview of like where we would need to go with this?
Yeah, so I guess it would be good to talk about, one is kind of prerequisites to be able to give an injection without inducing needle shyness. And then the next thing is we should probably talk about classical conditioning and operant conditioning, because those are options to go down. And they may be more or less helpful for different horses, and in the preparation if a horse has never had an injection before. So in terms of prerequisites, it sounds really simple, but is your horse actually okay with you approaching, standing in the position for the injection, and even being touched? So sometimes when you and this can be a difficult thing to notice, sometimes your horse is not even okay being touched in that area. And that could be if they're needle shy or if they have never had an injection. Either way, you need to get to the stage where they are completely comfortable and they feel safe being touched in those locations. So I guess generally that would be the neck, although some injections might be better given into other muscle locations. And then you brought up the interesting thing earlier about you preparing at home and then the vet arriving. Well, that might be for a variety of different reasons. It might be that they recognize that specific person, or even the car, or the smell of the, you know, things like surgical spirit and stuff, I guess we probably smell of, and so they associate it with previous experiences. But even sometimes it might just be the presence of another person in that proximity, that they're okay with one person in that location. They're not actually okay with two people in that location, even just for being touched. That could be, you know, paring back the layers right to the beginning. So that would be a thing to check out, and that you can have somebody either, well, probably vaguely known first would be helpful, and then progressing to people they've never met before. And that can be an important part of the preparation. They could just be standing nearby initially, or they could be participating in the preparation themselves. Yeah. And even things that may, in the moment of it being a bit stressful when there's an injection happening, you may not remember that, say, for example, they can't see very well out of one eye, or they don't tend to particularly like touch on one side, or you've prepared them on one side and not on the other, and you're actually doing it on the unprepared side. Those are all things to take into consideration as well. Sometimes the sight of a needle and syringe can also induce the fear if they're already fearful, or if horses are particularly sensitive to new experiences, they could even, I suppose, get a heightened sense of worry, even if they've never had an adverse experience with a needle. So that's kind of, I would think about the prerequisites, and that would also include things like doing it in a familiar area, somewhere that's not too noisy and busy and have friends around and that kind of thing. And another prerequisite is your mindset. And that can be a challenging thing, especially in a case where you're treating, you know, you're worried about them because they're not well and having to treat them in that case. So plenty of self-compassion for how you're feeling as well, you know, not thinking, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this, or going down that road. But certainly things like not rushing for the appointment, so you get there all flustered and you haven't got the horse in yet and the vet's waiting, and you're things like that can really help. You know, you had some time to do some things that are familiar to them, you've got yourself sorted, you're not running out of time. So yeah, all sorts of prerequisites like that can be really helpful. And then talking about the two different kinds of conditioning. So what we're really trying to do is turn something that is actually inherently unpleasant, I mean, who likes having an injection, into something that's more neutral and that they still feel safe. So we might, depends on the individual, but we might not get to a stage where they actively enjoy it, the actual needle going in and the injection. But there's certainly lots of successes in zoos and things, you know, cooperative care settings with various exotic animals where they very willingly present, you know, they need regular blood tests or something, they very willingly present the area, they know the drill. There's quite a lot that goes into that. I mean, it's a lot of preparation, and there's also important rules like one stick for the day. So if the needle goes in and you fail to give the injection or draw the blood, that's it for the day. And that's an agreement that you have with the animal, which you may have to break in an emergency. But yes, so there's
so they know it's over with. It's like,
that's right.
No matter how unpleasant, it's just the one.
That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
That's
and that really helps in the continued willing participation. But yeah, in terms of, so you can go down the route of classical conditioning, in which there's an association made between two things, and so you could counter condition, make something that is less pleasant into something that feels more pleasant. And really there's lots of quite scientific explanations of those terms, but what we are aiming for is a change in the emotions associated with it. Not just a change in the behavior. So I'm really interested in, if a horse is standing stock still, are they standing stock still, breathing, still aware of what's going on, thinking it through, or are they standing stock still about to leave, or are they standing stock still already checked out, not even really here? Those three things are very different scenarios to be in, and I don't feel, in an emergency it might be different, but I don't feel like that is, to me, a satisfactory outcome of we got it done, but there was all of this underlying emotional turmoil going on. But the really powerful thing that I've been diving into is the operant conditioning, and that is where the animal, so the learner, becomes an operator in the process, and they have some agency. And that's really transformative, because just counter conditioning can sometimes break down when there's an overwhelm in the system. But the really powerful stuff is where they realize that they can also cue you. That requires a commitment on your part to honor that. That's really important. And again, there might be cases where in an emergency you're unable to in the same way, but they're amazingly forgiving. So you can rebuild if that is the case. But yeah, in terms of preparation, I think that is the most powerful. But individual horses, you have some that are pretty accepting and I don't know whether I like that word. Take things in their stride. Truly take things in their stride.
Accepting's one notch up from tolerating.
Yeah. I don't think I really meant accepting. I'm thinking of a horse that is in general in their life is pretty well equipped to absorb new things like that. And in which case classical conditioning may well be enough for a preparation. Like, oh great, I get a cookie and it's not that bad, I can have an injection. Whereas you might have some other horses that are particularly sensitive, or if there's been trauma, where the operant conditioning is really needed, because it's likely that just say feeding some treats or something is going to break down, because they'll blow through that being something that will be helpful to them, because their nervous system state won't be able to, it won't be in a receptive place for that.
It's like the person with me just saying, okay, ready? And I go, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than, grabbing my arm and strapping it to the table or
Absolutely,
something.
Yeah. And both situations happen in horses, and you can teach a start signal. So you can do the, okay, ready? Yes, proceed. And then, okay, ready? No response. Or even you can teach a no. Don't proceed. And that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't really, I've played around a little bit with this, but I feel like I'm just at the beginnings of really diving into the details of the start, those kind of signals, start and stop. Even though I give my horses a lot of choice, like with bridling, here it is. They either put it on or they look away. And a lot of my horses now, like, they'll look away, yawn, and then they'll be like, okay, I'm ready now. And then they put their head in it. And it's like, yeah, sure, you can take that time.
Well, I would say that you're using them, because you don't have to teach them you can teach them as a specific behavior, or you can just incorporate being aware of what your horse does in a sequence before they are happily committing themselves to something. And when you notice their natural no signals or their natural yes signals, then you respond accordingly. And that's a huge part of attunement, because they definitely notice.
I have a question.
Yeah.
All right, so, and this has come up sometimes. So with the horse where I'm teaching relax your neck down, and I can reward that. So and I'll say that down and then hold, and then reward that hold, and then reward that. And then at some point it's hold, and then they get in the injection. But now I'm like putting in something uncomfortable right when they did the thing that I was asking. And it feels a little bit like, well, why should they? No. Now will they associate the head down with, oh, I'm about to get a needle? And I just kind of overcome that by doing a lot of heads down, and only a small fraction of times there's something uncomfortable that happens there, and that it's less uncomfortable because their neck is relaxed. So I kind of use that. But is that the way to? I feel a little bit like, oh man, I told them it was going to be relaxed, and then I give them the shot right at that moment. How do we make sure we're not messing that up?
That's an excellent question. So two things. One is that building a really strong reinforcement history with that initial part of the behavior. And actually, I think one particular animal trainer, Ken Ramirez, he uses a 100-to-1 rule. So you do 100 of the build-up to one needle.
Gotcha.
So it's a commitment to a lot of work on the build-up, the preparation.
And I usually tend to want to do it after the injection too. I do a few more head downs right afterwards, so that it's not always ending on the one that hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. Exactly. And then the other thing is, I guess you could liken this to loading and traveling. When there's a slight delay between the build-up and the unpleasant thing, then you can break that association somewhat. If a horse is, fine with, hopefully horses are prepared for traveling in a way that they also understand it and feel safe, and that it isn't too unpleasant. But say, for example, you've got a really bumpy road that you have to go down. It's no choice, but after loading, you have a really bumpy road to go down, or windy for the first section. To avoid that association with loading, and I get bounced around, you would probably include a gap, right? So you'd load, you'd wait a bit, as long they're calm, and then so it's not, they don't build that association.
So it's not like, oh, when she asked me to put my head down, I'm going to get a shot. It's like, okay, my head's down, yay.
That's right.
And then a shot came along. Okay, I didn't really think about that. The delay. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's one way. You can't do too much of a delay if you're doing a start button type behavior, because the understanding between you is the horse says, okay, I'm cueing you now for the next bit. Yes. Right. It depends a little bit which route you're going down, but that could be an option. Yeah.
No, that's super interesting. Yeah. So I guess one way is just to make this suggestion to the horse, and then I know there's going to be a shot coming. And the other is to say that head down is actually the horse. That's the horse's cue for.
Yes.
I know what's going to happen. And I see it's going to be an injection. You're all standing in that place. I felt a little poke, like the fake, I have a little fake poker. Yeah. And they still then offer that, not from my cue necessarily, but from them. Is there a cue for that? Or am I waiting for them? Like I've already built that up, and I'm saying, okay, when your head goes down, I know you're telling me that you're ready.
There are various options there that you can choose from. So a head down is a really good one, a really good example. That one actually is technically an anchor behavior. So they continue with the behavior all through giving you permission. And it's an active anchor behavior, because they can choose, they're having to actively keep their head down during it, and any head raise is coming out of that anchor behavior. So if you were to approach them with the needle and they were to put their head up, then you pause. You've re-established the anchor behavior. A start button would be something, you can either do something like touch an object, or that would probably be the the main one, or step onto a mat, for example. That could also be considered an anchor behavior because they're on the mat throughout. The only thing is it's more of a passive anchor behavior. Once they're on it, and it's more active to come out of it. So they might feel, especially if they tend to go into freeze, or depending on where you're standing, they might, for another reason beyond misunderstanding the behavior, not step back off the mat, and then you have a misunderstanding. So that is one example, but I probably wouldn't use that for an injection. But yeah, something like a start button could be touching an object, a known object, and then they learn that that's the sequence that happens. I touch the object, this happens. Therefore, if I don't touch the object, it's not coming. So they have that control. Or you can use a signal that they naturally give you. So you might build up a rhythm with, say, you feed them with, you're standing maybe slightly in front of them, you might feed them slightly to one side and then show them something that, or teach a nose target or something, and you build up that rhythm and they come to expect what's coming next. And what you can do is gradually change the timing so that as they're, say for example, you were to choose a head position as your start signal, then you actually change your timing to present the object as they're in that head position. And you gradually switch, and then they realize that their head position is cueing that thing to appear. And that's you building the start button. So you could do that and then have a predictable chain of events that happens after that.
Okay. And that can work even with something like an injection that might be physically just uncomfortable. They'll still do that. They can still understand. They're like, okay, do it, I'm ready, even though they know it's going to be unpleasant, just because that's built in so strong.
Yeah, it's
so interesting.
Yeah, so partly I guess it might be that the reinforcement is effective because it's maybe something like a high value food reward. But a note of caution about that would be that if they don't really feel safe, but they understand that that will be the reward, you can get some conflict, and it can actually turn into a coercive training session inadvertently. You're kind of, so if there's any withholding of the food, for example, that's an important part of not causing conflict within them and frustration. And actually that can be why things like aggression come up with using food in training, because they're getting frustrated with, well, I don't understand the rules, or this is not fair, you're withholding what I'm giving you behaviors and the reward isn't forthcoming. So high value reinforcers is good, but as long as they have a really solid understanding of how to achieve that, and as long as you're really paying attention to their emotional state and how they're learning and understanding. And then the other really important thing is that strong reinforcement history of the chain of events without the unpleasant thing at the end. And sometimes it happens, but a lot of the time they don't have to get to that bit. So they know that this thing is not always cueing an unpleasant end result. It might come, and then they sort of can prepare themselves.
But the whole experience has so much of them participating in it. I mean, it's so different than, here comes the vet and now they're being restrained, and now this, it just, even just to have that like process of communicating in the presence of a vet and a needle and the position just gives it so much more. And, I know that this is possible. I've seen videos of Jennifer Zellig's with her sea lions, and the sea lion is, at liberty. It's not being constrained. And it approaches, she's there, and a vet, sea lion dentist, and the sea lion opens its mouth from the queue and stands there for, I think, like 11 injections. It needed all these teeth pulled. 11, multiple. And it stood there. It was there on cue, not restrained. And I thought, oh boy, I got a lot to learn. So, to see something like that is so inspirational of like what could happen if you take the time and build this cooperation trust and feeling of safety.
Yeah,
that was
absolutely.
I don't think I would be able to do that. Like, I need to be in the chair. Maybe not restrained, but anyway. I forgot one other technique that for those other human needle shy people out there, that we can do with humans that maybe isn't possible with animals. But when the person's getting ready to draw my blood, I can use peer pressure. I usually say something like, oh yeah, the last person who drew my blood, she was telling me about how there's a way you can insert the needle where it doesn't hurt as much. And then some of them get all proud and they're like, well, I want to do it even. Oh yeah, if you make sure that the bevel edge is pointing this way and not that, And, so I've learned to do that and open up the possibility that there was a way for them to give me the shot where it would hurt less.
Yes.
And I've had people totally ignore me and jam it in there and it hurt the whole time. And but for a lot of them, they kind of like start engaging and then they're proud of themselves because they want to be one of those people who knows how to do it right.
Yeah. And
so maybe we can say that to vets. So like, I was reading about there's a way you can insert the needle where it doesn't hurt the horse as much.
Yeah. And sometimes actually just the choice of needle and syringe size and how quickly you inject or draw blood can really affect that. But you touched on a really important thing with the sea lion that just made me think of it. And then you started talking about pain. So this is really important. Another thing that I dive into on the course is how pain actually works and the fact that there is a huge amount of emotional influence on it. And if you feel safe, you actually are likely to feel less pain or feel less of an unpleasant emotional response to that pain. You're being held by somebody supportive in that experience. It's a lot less aversive, even if it's still, there's a sensation, because so the definition of pain includes the fact that it's not just a sensory experience, it's an emotional one.
Mm-hmm.
And you can lessen the sensory part of it with things like your injection technique, like you said, ice packs beforehand, nice relaxed muscle, sometimes a little bit of massaging the area, paying attention to areas where they might be painful. Don't choose a spot on their neck where they've obviously got some discomfort already, all of that kind of thing. And then the emotional part of it is that them feeling safe and understanding the process and feeling that they have the space to say, oh wait, I'm not ready yet. And with that sea lion, I'm sure that a large part of that is just building up that huge bank of experiences where they knew that they could have some agency in the process.
Yep.
And so the choice becomes, I'll do that for you.
Yeah. I mean, Jennifer talks all the time about the importance of the relationship.
Absolutely.
In the training.
Yeah. And sometimes there might be situations where there's this concept of the like relationship bank balance. You might have to make a bit of a withdrawal, but it is all of those deposits. They really do make a huge difference.
Absolutely. The connection of emotions and pain reminds me of I did the Tony Robbins thing where you walk across the hot coals.
Oh yeah.
And and it's pretty cool. So you're priming your brain, the whole thing, you're in the moment, you walk across. So I walked across the coals and at the end you brush your feet off because as soon as you're across, you come out of the state, right? So but you're still kind of high from the whole energy. I mean, you're still there. So, I walked across the coals and I remember feeling like I had a little one stuck between my toes, but we got it out. And I was like, I'm flying, I'm an amazing rock star. And then met up with my husband and we get to the car and, we're both just like, oh my God, it was awesome. And get in the car and then there's like a little traffic jam getting out of the parking lot. There's always someone who's just in the wrong place or going too slow or blocking everybody else. And I remember like I got out of state and I got like a little, come on, dude, like get going. I came out of my my emotional state switched and all of a sudden my toe started burning. I was like,
Wow.
oh my God. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a blister, whatever. And then I was like, oh wait, like what just happened here? And so we were in the car, like making our move, we like put ourselves back in the state, and then it stopped hurting. I'm like,
what an excellent
okay,
example. Yeah.
that was one of the best lessons of, when I got cranky, everything hurt more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I was feeling like, a warrior,
yeah,
I literally didn't feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It was so, it was, that lesson was unavoidable, because it was like the difference between searing pain and nothing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's an excellent example.
Yeah. So I don't know how we help our horses. Just, I mean, I think, what you're saying, there's just so many factors. And I love that, you're bringing in this really holistic view of it, because you can Google some things online and find a video of a little technique, but it's the context and the intention and the history and the relationship and all those things that add up. So I love that you have this resource. So for anybody listening who wants to find out more about this, now, if anybody's listening to this episode on August 25th, on the Friday, the day that it's released, you're in luck, because I think tomorrow, August 26th, you're doing a webinar on this. And then, so I guess just let people know, like, how can you get on that webinar, and then where to find out more about the online course, and all of that.
So it is accessible via my website, which is www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk, and you can find all of the information on the page, which is /learn-online, or you can look at on the homepage, you can look at work with me and upcoming events, and you can find it that way. Either way will take you. You can find a link to that webinar.
Cool. And I'll put that link in the show notes for anybody.
Perfect.
You can find this, scroll down for show notes, or look on my website. There's a spot for them. So, but maybe say your website again one more time.
Yeah, it's www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk.
Awesome.
And that /learn-online will take you to the Needle-Shyness online course information. So currently there's the link to that webinar on there. There will be a recording available to anybody who signs up for that webinar beforehand. I then put the recordings of those things. So I generally do a monthly Q&A call on various topics. I put them on my membership. But if you miss it and you still want some information, you can also actually find a webinar for sale. So I call it part A of the course, because it does include some techniques which are not quite as in depth as the part B, which is a full course. Part A is just an hour-long webinar, and you can find that on there as well. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So you can, get started on it, and then go in and do part B if you want. So exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lily, for taking this time, even though you just literally flew in last night. And I know the jet lag and culture shock, maybe, from coming from a remote camping at 10,000, and now
a bit,
back at sea level in society. But super, super helpful. Thank you again so much. And I'll put links to your Facebook page and your website in the show notes. And thank you.
Yeah, you are welcome. I enjoyed it.